My guest on today's show is Mr. Anthony Tormey. Anthony spent 20 years in the U.S. Air Force in special operations as a pararescueman. You'll hear him talk a little bit about his experience, but I've got to tell you, having grown up a good chunk of my childhood right outside of Homestead Air Force Base, and being an Air Force Junior ROTC for 4 years during high school, I got to learn a lot about Air Force pararescuemen, and they are one of the most elite forces that are probably the least known. A tremendous amount of skills that they have to learn to do their job. When he retired from the Air Force, he founded the Leadership Development Institute back in 1997. He's the founder and CEO of that company, and he has presented over 3,000 seminars to 75,000 participants in all 50 states, England, Australia, and Uganda. LDI has trained and coached professionals across this country, the United States, and around the world, and under his leadership, they built a long, influential relationship with government agencies and corporate organizations in all 50 states. And as I mentioned, also England, Australia, and Uganda. Now, I met him through some mutual training acquaintances and actually did some training for him with the Department of Homeland Security with their Office of the CFO, if I recall correctly. And he is here today to share with us the language of the mind and where it can take you. So with that, please welcome my guest today, Anthony Tormey. So we have with us today Mr. Anthony Tormey, who I met in the context of training. So with that being said, Anthony, if you wouldn't mind giving our audience whatever you would like to give in terms of introduction as far as who you are and what you do.
Sure. Well, a lot of times I like to introduce myself with a little bit about my pre-training background, because it really lends itself to where I am today. And so I tell people I spent 20 years serving this great nation of ours as a member of the United States Air Force. The first 10 years of that, I spent jumping out of airplanes, scuba diving, rappelling out of helicopters, really just having a great time in the role as a pararescueman, which is a special operations within the United States Air Force. So I spent 10 years doing that. Went back to school, got my degree, my subsequent commission, and became a second lieutenant and started flying on board the AWACS airplane. And I oftentimes ask your audience, if you've ever seen an airplane with that giant frisbee-like thing on top, okay, that's the AWACS. And contrary to popular belief, we cannot see inside your living room. Well, with that airplane.
With that airplane.
With that airplane. But after I retired from the Air Force, I started a company called Leader Development Institute. And we've got a cadre of about a half dozen trainers. We've trained all across the United States, all 50 states. We've been to England. We've been to Uganda, Africa. We've been to Australia. Over 3,000 seminars and participants have been through our seminars across the country. My vision in life, my personal vision statement, is to have a positive influence on the people that I meet every day. And so hopefully today I'll have a positive influence on your audience members.
Yeah, I think it would be pretty difficult not to. So just from what you shared right there, there's all kinds of questions I have. The first one has to do with your experience as a pararescueman. And so for some context for those in the audience, I never served in the military, but my dad was in the Army for 30 years and he retired outside of Homestead Air Force Base. Oh, yeah. And so I was in Air Force Junior ROTC for 4 years in high school. And one of the instructors actually had spent some time in those AWACS that you're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
And because of being near an Air Force base and an Air Force ROTC, I was fortunate enough to learn a lot about these PJs that you were a part of. Mm-hmm. Share with our audience. I think the PJs are probably one of the least known professions within the area of special operations. So people have heard a lot about Navy SEALs. They've probably heard of Green Berets. Tell us a little bit about what is involved in being a PJ, because my understanding is it's a very broad skill set that they have.
Very much so, and not too dissimilar from Navy SEALs or Marine Force Recon or Rangers, Special Forces. We all bring to the table a very broad spectrum of specialties and skill sets. Some of us specialize more than others, but the one thing that separates Pararescue from many of the others is our medical background and experience. To the point where the PJs that are coming out of the pipeline today are, no kidding, I don't know what the level is, but a nationally certified paramedic, where they get licensed and everything else. And a little side note joke to my brethren, whether it be the Navy SEALs or the Special Forces, Green Berets, whatever, when they need help, they call us.
Yeah. So you, instead of Ghostbusters, is who they're going to call.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
So if you look at some of the major battles that have gone on in the recent history, pararescuemen have been involved with every one of them.
Yeah. One of the films that we saw when I was in ROTC in high school was about the PJs and the Sky Raiders back in Vietnam era. The Sky Raiders were the guys that did close air support for the guys on the ground. So when they sent in guys like you, they were kind of, giving you guys support from the air. So that was the first time I heard about the PJs. And then I was involved in a car accident when I was in high school. And it just fortunately, because we were so close to the Air Force Base, one of the guys who stopped to help was a PJ. And I knew enough about them to go, all right, we're in good hands here.
Good hands. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I've actually heard people say that the medical training that they receive today is almost at the level of a physician's assistant by the time they finish all their medical training.
There's a lot of things that PJs can do out in the field that an EMT wouldn't do, on the street. Absolutely, for sure.
Yeah. So I think from my exposure to listening to a lot of people in different special operations, the thing that distinguishes each one more than anything seems to be the mission, right? Because as you said, a lot of the same skills, a lot of the same schools you might go to. How did you get interested in becoming a pararescueman? Because that's an elite path to choose.
Sure. It's an interesting question. And it's a funny story, a little bit beyond. I don't want to necessarily take up a lot of time with it, but in high school, you get visited by a recruiter. I was always an outdoorsman type of a kid, and played sports, that kind of stuff. And I didn't want to go into the Air Force just to be a mechanic or a police officer or a cook or something like that. I wanted something that was, no kidding, high speed. And so I got to see the video about Pararescue. And that was right up my alley. I said, I'm in. I want to go in and become a PJ. My recruiter tells me, says, well, we're sorry, but that's a volunteer only position. You can't do that. You can't be guaranteed that job until you go down there and you try out. And only if you succeed do you get to be at least try out to be a PJ. So by the time I got down to basic training, that's exactly what I did. And I started off with about 400 other individuals who were interested in being a PJ. And by the time we graduated with just 7 of us.
So you actually used a term when you were describing your current company. I think you used the word cadre.
Yep.
Right. A holdover from your military days.
100%. For sure.
So is that just a term for instructors in the military? I've heard the term before, but for the folks that are not familiar with it.
So I've always heard the term cadre as in the military profession, but I also think of it I think universities use it also sometimes when they talk about a cadre of instructors or professors on a team or something like that. So it's just something that stuck with me. I'm not really quite sure as to how to explain where it came from, but that's how I've always termed our team, our family of instructors and trainers.
Gotcha. So 10 years as a PJ, and then you decided to go to officer candidate school, get your commission.
Yep.
What was the impetus for that? That's a real departure from being in the field doing the real hands-on stuff.
Sure. So no offense to my fellow NCOs, but I figured if I was going to spend 20 years in the military, I might as well get paid for it. And so And so that's why I went and got my degree and my subsequent commission. But then I also joke, and no offense to my officer friends, in that when I went from being an NCO to being that second lieutenant, I lost all the respect I ever had. And if you know anything about the military, second lieutenants don't always get a lot of respect.
Yeah, from what I've seen, not much. It's a weird position to be in because in terms of rank, they're superior in rank to even the most senior NCO.
Correct.
But if you're a brand new butter bar second lieutenant, you have absolutely no experience other than training classes.
Right.
So it's a really
good.
odd, it would be like somebody coming right out of high school or right out of college with no experience, and they're supervising, managers with 10 or 15 years experience. It's odd.
And it's the exact same thing. It's the exact same thing. And a good manager, a good supervisor, a good leader within the corporate America, just as a good leader or second lieutenant within the ranks of the military, will really lean on and lean into their senior NCOs and even some of their other NCOs who have some background experience on the mission and on the job, and value that input. And that's really important to take note, even in corporate America today, how important it is for leaders to truly understand the value of those frontline employees and what they bring to the table, because they're the ones that are doing what it is that they're doing every single day. And if you're not communicating with them, you're not interacting with them, you're not engaging with them in a positive, effective manner, then your organization is going to suffer as a result of that, for sure.
How would you compare or contrast the leadership that you learned your first 10 years as a PJ to the leadership that you learned through leadership schools when you were becoming an officer?
So, I wouldn't necessarily say the leadership training that I had as an officer was anything, mind blowing or surprising. I mean, it's very much textbook type stuff. In fact, when we go out and we do training across the country and we work with DOD, Department of Defense, whether it's the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, whatever, and we have blue suiters sitting in on our classes, the feedback we get from them is this training was more relevant and more applicable than any of the PME, or for your listeners, professional military education that we have gone through, whether it be your NCO academy, your officers training school. All these things are very academic. But when we bring the training to them in today's world, it's about real life experience. So when there's a lot of things, there's a lot of genealogy, if you will, to where I am today. In other words, the ancestry of my career. And when I became a PJ, you are put into leadership positions very early. I flew into a mountainous area in New Mexico, in which I had to be lowered by a cable, by a hoist from a helicopter on the top of this mountain. And as I get into this ravine and I start doing the rescue, I've got volunteers that have hiked all day long to get to the top of this mountain. I come in as a young 20-something-year-old pararescue man, and now all of a sudden I'm in charge. Okay, it's my mission, it's my operation. I'm extended to a helicopter in the air, and I'm trying to get this individual, this victim, out of this area. And I've got to be able to take control of 20 other individuals that have hiked all day and are trying to complete this rescue, but they can't without me. And so I have to take on that leadership role. But I would also say, if you look at my genealogy, I've been involved with the Boy Scouts for over 20 years. Mm-hmm. And I would say to you that for those of you who are in scouting, probably already know this, but one of the best leadership training programs I've ever been to was through the Boy Scouts of America. And it's called Wood Badge. It was an extraordinary hands-on type of an experience. And it really taught me what experiential learning is, experiential training is, and hands-on and group discussions and conversations, just how powerful they are in really internalizing the message or the lead or the training that's being presented. And so I brought those things to the military, and I started training other officers and NCOs. during my military career on leadership. Young lieutenants and early captains, was training them on leadership and how to lead. I was doing it through NCOs and through TQM, if you remember that term back in the day, total quality management.
Yeah.
And so I use all those skills to train officers and NCOs. I got certified by this Covey Institute to facilitate the 7 habits as well. And so all these things led to me where I am today, to where I attended a seminar in Oklahoma City, is where I was at the time. And I sat and listened to this woman. I said, man, I can do that. I wonder how much that pays, because I'm going to be retiring someday. And having a conversation with her, I learned a little bit more about what she was doing, who she was doing it for, one of these national training seminar companies. And 2 years before I retired, I just started doing training in the corporate world. Took vacation time, leave time, and took my experiences not only in active duty, but certainly in my civilian work with the Boy Scouts and leading other adults. I was a district commissioner, which means I had a couple hundred adults in which I was providing some guidance and leadership to in the development of their scouting programs. So all that has brought me to where I am today. And one of the things that I've learned early on in my career, when I was building Leader Development Institute, was that I needed to find people that could do what I did as good as or better. And I am blessed with the cadre of trainers that we have who are as good as or better than me in different areas, different expertise, different skill sets that they bring to the table. And I'm learning from them all the time. All the time I'm learning from them. So it's been a fun ride so far, but we're not done.
So I'm sure you've heard that expression, and I'll probably paraphrase it. So I'm just going off the top of my head. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, build a team or take a team. So obviously from your background, you were working on teams and dealing in the business of leadership. It sounds like most of your life, even when you were a kid in the Boy Scouts. Is that what you think led you to so for example, I'm a trainer, but I work for myself and by myself, right? So sure. I just do things on a contract basis. You chose to take the team approach. Yes, was that just an obvious choice right out of the box for you?
It was a conscious choice. When I made the decision that I was going to build a career in this area, serving others, I was continuing to serve others. And that's why, again, my vision statement is to have a positive influence on the people that I meet every day. The vision statement for Pararescue, these things we do that others may live. That's our motto. That's our vision. That's our purpose statement. These things we do that others may live. And so when I created my vision statement, and it was a part of the Covey Institute process that it took me a while to come to that conclusion, I decided when I was going to make this a career that I didn't want it to be the Anthony Tormey Roadshow. Okay? I didn't want it to be me alone. I wanted to build a team. I wanted to create an organization, which led me to brainstorming the term Leader Development Institute versus, Anthony Tormey and Company or something like that. And so I took the branding away from me and I made it my organization, which is LDI. LDI for short.
When I think institute, that to me, it kind of makes me think about something that is almost like it almost has a feel to it like it's a research based or trying to think of the other things that pop into my head, but it sounds much different than a company, right? There's something about that word that brings a lot of things to mind. Was there a specific reason you chose to use the word institute?
Sure. Again, you may have heard of Robert Cialdini.
Yes.
He's the father of influence. Yes, absolutely. And the theme with the theme of your show also is words have meaning. Words have impact. And institute is exactly that. It creates that vision in your mind. It creates that picture in your mind of what an institute is. And yes, of course, we bring research. I mean, I've been researching and reading. If I showed you my library, the books that I've read, my trainers do the same thing. We make references to that research and we bring that stuff to the table. And so I think it's important that our audiences, yours and mine, recognize and understand that when we're talking about communication, words have meaning. And too often we don't take time to think about the words and the meaning that they have and how they can make a difference in influencing people or having a dialogue or having a conversation. One of the phrases I'd like to share with your audience that is an example of this, and that is a phrase that I've come up with, that I've used, that I teach on, and that I build on. It's called success. It's everything you think it is. Success. It's everything you think it is. Okay? And it's important to understand that those words have meaning. So let's break it down. The first one is success. You have success as it's defined for you. Okay? We all do. And the reason this is so important is because some people will define success by fortune and fame. Okay? That might be the measure of success. For other people, success, quite frankly, may simply be getting out of bed in the morning. That's it. That's success. Okay. Yeah. Success will be going through this podcast and having an effective event. Success could be raising your family and your children to be productive members of society. And so it's really important to understand, how do we define words? How do we use words? How do we place them in our conversation? So success, everything you think it is defined by us individually, not by me, not what I think success should be, not by you, not what you think success should be, but by the individual. And then the rest of the question, or the rest of the statement, it's everything you think it is. Okay. So I've already defined the first part of that. So success is everything you think it is. Okay. You think it's X, I think it's Y. Okay. Somebody else thinks it's A, somebody else thinks it's B. It's what we think success is. However, the play on words or understanding that I like to use is it's also success is everything you think. And that's what brings us success. One of the things that excites me and motivates me as well in teaching on this topic and bringing these topics to individuals and audiences is to recognize and understand that, we spend a lot of time, John, learning about effective communication. Fair statement? Mm-hmm. We spend a lot of time learning about effective communication with other people, okay, with other people. How do I communicate with you in an effective manner? Whether it's be to influence, whether it's be to persuade, whether it's be to entertain, whether it's to go into dialogue and information, whatever it is, we spend a lot of time, conflict management, confrontation, all those things. We learn how do we communicate in order to get what we want, okay? But I don't think there's enough time or enough energy, enough resources that are spent teaching us about the conversations and the communication we have within ourselves. That's a conversation. That is communication that I think people can get the biggest bang for their buck with, is learning how do you communicate with yourself. Okay. And so that is where this phrase success, it's everything you think it is, really comes from. It's about taking us and guiding us into having a conversation. And I'll ask you, and your audience can answer this as well. How many of you speak to yourself? How many of you talk to yourself? John, do you talk to yourself?
Of course.
Sure. We all talk to ourselves. Do you answer yourself?
I'm going to sound crazy for saying this, but yeah, I do.
Well, of course, you answer yourself, and your audience members, I'm sure, do as well. What would make you crazy is if you talk to the dog and they answered you. Okay.
Yeah.
So talking to yourself, answering yourself, that is nothing more than what? Thinking. That's the thinking process. Okay. It's what I call the conversation of the mind. Okay. How much time do we have a conversation of the mind?
Yeah.
We do it, but we don't ever really think about doing it. It's just kind of flows through, like the clouds in the sky. They come in and they go away. But when we start to really think about thinking, okay, then we start to have some real empowerment, if you will. And there's a model that I share with people, and I share it with you today. Everything that we everything that we do is created twice. Is created twice. The first time is up here in our heads. The second time is when we actually say or do it. Okay. And what I'd like your audience to take away from this today is to recognize that if I can change the way they think, or if they can change the way they think, they can change the way they feel. If they change the way they feel, they'll change the way they act, okay, or their responses, or their actions. Okay. And so what that simply means is we can't change our emotions. We can't. They are deep inside our limbic system within our brain. Okay. It's a part of who we are. Okay. And they're sometimes they're just responsive. Okay. However, if we can't change our emotions, we can influence them. And we influence our emotions either by what we think. Okay. Our thoughts will drive our emotions. And you can't have unhappy thoughts and be smiling. You can't have happy thoughts and be grouchy. Okay. The same goes true with your physical state. Many of you may have heard the phrase, if you change your physical state, you can change your emotional state. Okay. So these three things go hand in hand. And of course, the actions have a sidebar that results in consequences. Okay. Those consequences results in more thought or thinking as a result of those consequences. Oh, I'm happy that happened, or I'm afraid that happened, or I'm angry that happened, or I'm upset that happened. Okay. And so it's that conversation on how we interpret it, that result, okay, that consequence that determines our emotions. How do we interpret that? How do we talk about that? So that's a really important, good thing. Go ahead.
So many things that you triggered as I'm listening to you. That one of them on the top of my mind is one of the guys that I used to work with who's super successful in financial services. He used to tell all his new guys, you can't seize it until you seize it. And for those of you that are just listening and not watching, the first seize is SEIZE, like grabbing something. And the second one is SEE, with your eyes, right? If you can't see it in your mind's eye first, it's going to be a lot more difficult for you to manifest whatever it takes to actually have that thing in the physical world. Couple of other things too, for anyone that wants to take a deeper dive on this, and I promise you this was not set up beforehand. This is just where the conversation took us. 20 some years ago, somebody turned me on to this book called What to Say When You Talk to Yourself by Dr. Shad Helmstetter. And he literally goes into detail about the do's and the don'ts of how our mind works and how critically important it is, not just what we say when we're talking to ourselves, but how we say it. Tony Robbins talks about this too, the distinction between like an affirmation and an incantation, right? An affirmation might be something like, all I need is within me now. That's one of the ones I've heard him say, right? That would be like an affirmation. And incantation is when you add the physiology to it that imbues that emotion in it, that then gives it way more power. So if I said, all I need is within me now, that's very different from all I need is within me now, like saying it powerfully, using your physiology. It also reminded me, there was a training that I did a month or so ago with some body language experts. Actually, behavior experts is probably more accurate than body language. And they were talking about how to influence someone. One of the guys, Chase Hughes, talks about when it comes to influence, think about when you're going to engage with someone, think about yourself as an electrician and a chemist, because all of our thoughts are triggered by the electricity going through our body and the chemicals that our brain fires off in different parts of our body, right? So stories, for example, will get our body to release oxytocin and dopamine and serotonin, and each one of these different chemicals that we have within our own body. We're not drugging people other than with their own drugs that they make themselves, right? They're built in pharmacy. But what you say and how you say it and how you interact with people can literally cause these chemical reactions to occur that put them into a particular state of mind, a particular emotion, and can help move them to do something. But it all starts in the mind. Even though you're manifesting physical things, it still is all starting with the thoughts and how you're influencing those thoughts.
Sure. And this is not to diminish mental health or depression or anything of that nature. I'm just sharing my own personal experience. And that I've had bouts of being bummed out or depressed about things there. I just didn't want to get out of bed in the morning. I mean, things just had me paralyzed. But I oftentimes take a moment to reflect on exactly this conversation. What is the conversation that I need to have in my mind? Because so far, the conversation I'm having pretty much sucks. It pretty much sucks, and it's just dragging me down. But I can't break it. I can't snap out of it. And then when I have a fleeting moment to remember the things that I talk about, the things that I've learned, the things that I studied, I realize that in that moment, I just simply say to myself, Anthony, just wiggle your toes. Wiggle your toes. Wiggle your toes. Wiggle my toes. And in that moment, I wiggle my toes. And in that moment, physical state changes your emotional state. Things we're just talking about here.
Yeah.
Not like I'm up and jumping around or anything else, but what it does for me is by wiggling my toes, now I know who is in control. I'm in control. I'm in control. And so I by virtue of just simply doing what I've commanded myself to do, wiggle my toes, it creates and opens the door. It opens the door for me to go, okay, I'm in control. I am in control. Let me just throw my leg over the side of the bed. And incrementally, okay?
Yeah.
Incrementally, I just throw my leg over the side of the bed. Again, another physical event. Like, it's not the Anthony Robbins, I'm in charge.
Yeah.
But it's still the same exact thing. I'm in control of my body. I'm in control of making decisions. I can't always control what happens to me, but I can control how I've responded to it. We all have heard that before. And so I throw that leg over the side of the bed. In incremental approaches, it's not much farther to just sit up and roll over and sit up. I mean, this may take 30 minutes. I mean, it's not like it's happening because, again, recognizing the emotional state of depression, it's not like you're just going to go jump rope. Okay. So I sit up in bed, and next thing you know, I'm out of bed. Okay. I'm out of bed. My dog now is all of a sudden influencing me because he's running up to me or she's running up to me, wagging his tail, wanting to play with me. All these things lead to. Now, the problem doesn't go away. Okay. The problem that got me to where I'm at does not go away. And what I hope your audience takes away from this is also in recognizing, how do we talk about the problem to ourselves? How do we frame it? How do we word it? How do we create the environment to change how we're thinking? Anthony Robbins talks about it, by breaking the pattern of thought and action.
Yep.
And I was in Saudi Arabia, probably the fourth time in 5 years with the military. I was deployed there. And in the day, when Saddam was still around, he had us pegged. He played us. He played us every year because right around November time frame, he would do something audacious in order to generate a response from the Allies in the United States. And of course, that meant deploying troops back into the region. which at that time I was with AWACS. And so here we are in the middle of Saudi Arabia, okay? And amongst itself, if you like travel, if you like culture, if you like diversity, it's an extraordinarily interesting place. And I've, again, changed the way I thought about being there versus it being a horrible place, okay? Some interesting parts about it. But on this particular occasion, it was Christmas Eve, and we were bummed. I mean, me and my colleagues, we were angry, we were ticked off. We were away from our family for the 4th time in 5 years. It was Christmas Eve. It was 105 degrees. Of course, there's not a lot of Christmas lights or Christmas spirit in the air, if you can imagine, in Saudi Arabia. And so we're just feeding the frenzy with each other about how horrible the job is and the mission, what we did yesterday, what we did today, what we're going to have to do tomorrow. And we're just griping and complaining and bitching with each other, and just winding up the axle, right? And I go back to Anthony Robbins again, and I think about this physical state and the emotional state. That's where I learned that from. And so I'm in military uniform with my fellow officers. We're walking down this road to the dining facility, a tent, okay, for Christmas meal. And I just break out into a skip, okay? I mean, I'm talking about skip to loo type of a skip, okay? And the guys that are with me all of a sudden just start laughing.
All of a sudden, you're crazy.
Thinking
he lost
and they're going, yeah, they're going, Tormey, what in hell are you doing? Okay. And I said, I'm skipping, man. I am skipping. And by virtue of that physical state, I started laughing as well. And so you can't skip and be miserable at the same time, John. You just can't. And so I'm skipping down this road here. They're making fun of me. They're laughing. They're joking. And it broke enough to where it changed the conversation. And this is what's important for your audience, John. It changed the conversation from bitching and moaning and complaining about what was going on in the state of our lives to where one of the guys I was looked up at one of the guard towers. And these guard towers are probably 50 yards apart or something, 40 feet, 50 feet in the air, 8x8 platform, right? And he looks at all of us. He goes, you know what? That poor kid up there, they can't even skip. And so it put into perspective what their situation was versus our situation, right? And it got us talking and got us thinking. It says, let's make their day. They're up there on Christmas Eve and they're there to protect us. So we went back to the dining hall, had our meal, filled up boxes of drinks and snacks and things that we can bring. And we took them around the entire perimeter. And we stopped at each one of them, wished them a Merry Christmas, thanked them for their, protecting our butts on the ground here. And we would toss them, some snacks and things like that. Made their day, made our day, made us happy, got us talking, got us thinking, got us interacting. And from that point forward, I never had a bad day. Okay. And we started doing different activities, different things that kept our focus on good things. And so that's how important it is to have that language of the mind going on.
Well, one of the things that you accomplish with that too is it's another thing. We keep talking about Anthony Robbins, but he's such a big impact in personal development, is the pattern interrupt, right? Your skipping interrupted their pattern of complaining and moaning and focusing on the negative. It's one of the things Chase Hughes talked about this. He was with the DIA, I think, for many years, the Defense Intelligence Agency. And he talks about how a pattern interrupt was sometimes one of the first things he would do. And he used a simple example in the civilian world. Next time you go into a Starbucks, when you go up to order, before you order, to get their full attention, just ask them something to break their pattern. Something as simple as, hey, I'm trying to figure out, do you know which direction north is? Now they're probably thinking, okay, this person's gonna, they're gonna order something or they're gonna have a question or whatever, but they have like a track that their mind is on. And that question is just complete. It kind of makes, it's like a record going around and all of a sudden it goes, the record gets scratched and they go, what?
Right.
Now you have their attention because you've got them out of this kind of just mode of just thinking the same pattern over and over again. It's a powerful thing that you could do, and it's very simple to do. but
For
you
sure.
have to be thinking, right? Again,
Mhm.
back to your internal dialogue. You have to be thinking and have the awareness to go, I think I need to do this. We're all kind of collectively in a bad pattern of language in our mind, of physical
Mhm.
actions in our body. Um, when you were talking, it reminded me of it's probably the worst Zig Ziglar impression you'll ever hear, but he was famous for the expression, sometime you've just got a stinking thinking and you need to get
Yeah.
a checkup from
Yeah.
the neck up,
Yep.
right? You need to kind of examine what's going on in here in my melon. What am I thinking about? Right?
Mhm.
There's this bad stuff going on out here. What's going on in here in my head is a big part of that. Um, I want to shift gears for a second here because I'm really curious about what your approach on this is, because you have a very varied background.
Mhm.
When it comes to goal setting, there's obviously a lot of different approaches to it, but the two that I always have trouble reconciling is I think about an approach like John Wooden, who way back in the day, he was the coach of the UCLA basketball team. I don't know how many championships they won, but they won a bunch of them while he was the coach. And he used to tell all of his players, don't worry about the other team. Don't worry about the scoreboard. All I want you to focus on is every day in practice, working on yourself and getting
Mhm.
better, and everything will take care of itself. Then you have other folks who take a different approach is you have to have a goal. You have to state the goal clearly, and maybe they might even talk about SMART goals and break all of that down. I look at those and I think those are kind of very, very different approaches to goal setting. How do you approach goal setting?
Well, I would say that, and not to be counter to what you're saying, but that in some ways those are actually very symbiotic to where um, you know, I may focus on myself, not in competing with others, okay, and or the scoreboard or whatever the case may be, because I do think that's counterproductive. Okay, I think it takes your mind off of what you actually need to be focused on. However, being able to identify what my goal is for within me is, I want to be able to score X number of points, okay, is within me. So when I look at setting goals for myself, again, it goes right back to Googling the brain. And I emphasize this not on grandiose type of goals, but if I'm looking at fortune and fame as a goal, one of the things I'd like to be able to do is have those reminders to me. And so that I can continue to have that conversation. And I'll explain that here in just a little bit. But if your audience is not familiar with them, I am a firm believer in having physical representation of what my goals are, whether it be a
Mm,
storyboard, whether it be a dream board, different names for these type of things, where
yep.
you create this collage of expectations or goals or wants, if you will, and you have it displayed somewhere
Yep.
as a constant reminder to you. Right? When I was becoming a PJ, I had the PJ flash, which is a little emblem that goes on your beret, on my desk. That was a constant reminder to me that that's what my goal was.
Mhm.
When I was becoming an officer, I had lieutenant bars that was on my desk. That was a constant reminder to me. But it's more than just that. It's more than just, I keep talking about the language of the mind, the conversation of the mind, to establish those goals or to reach those goals, to identify those goals. Because the first thing I have to do is I have to talk to myself. Okay. And the issue here, again, that I really want to emphasize with your listeners and with yourself as well, is to recognize the understand that what we have in here in between these 2 years is the world's most powerful and the first search engine. Okay.
Mm,
This is our search engine. Okay. And it works exactly like Google. It works exactly the same way. Okay. What happens when you type into your computer a word or a phrase, right? You type in a word or a phrase, hit, search, and what does Google do? Spits out a whole page full of things that are reference to what you asked it. Nothing more, nothing less. Garbage in, garbage out.
garbage out.
You get where I'm going with this? Garbage in, garbage out. So if I've got this goal, then I'm going to start asking myself questions that, how come everybody else is got this and I don't? Well, guess what the brain's going to do? Well, here's why, because you're an idiot. Because
be careful what you ask.
Yeah, because you're lazy, because you're whatever. It'll give you all the negative reasons why you're not getting that goal. But if I rephrase the question and I type it into my search engine, the brain will give me what I ask it. Right? If it's not exactly what I need, what do I do with Google? I refine my search. It's the same way, ladies and gentlemen. I got to refine my search up here and start re-asking the question in ways that'll drive me to the answer I want. I'm not a what's the right word I'm looking for? I'm not a student of the Bible, but I've read the Bible. I'm Christian, and the Bible always talks a lot of places in the Bible you can find on the power of prayer. Okay, the power of prayer. What it says is that if you pray or if you ask, you will receive. Okay. If you pray for what you want, you will get with what you want. Okay. That is that Google, that is that spiritual aspect of the brain. Okay. And asking for what it is that you want, and you will receive it. But what a lot of people forget about, and this is the phrase or the paragraph and verse I wish I had memorized. I want to say it's Matthew, in the book of Matthew. But one of the things that the Bible says, in addition to pray or ask and you shall receive in that format in some way, shape, or form, is it says that for those who do not work, you will not eat. Okay, so here's the real secret. Okay, you can pray for it, you can ask for it, you can visualize it, you can do it, but at the end of the day, you got to put in some effort.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of a gentleman by the name of Colonel Ed Hubbard, great friend of mine, good friend of mine. And he was a prisoner of war for 6 years. Okay. And he wrote a book, 6.5 years actually, in Vietnam. And after he came out of Vietnam, he wrote a book, and it was titled Human Potential, A State of Mind. Okay. And he talks about that it only takes two things. You get anything in this world you want. Anything, and Ziegler talks about this too. You get anything in this world that you want. It's what the first is what you think you want, what you think about that you want, and the amount of effort that you're willing to put forward in order to accomplish that. So these are things, again, all relate to communication, but it all has to do with communication with ourselves. Okay.
Yeah.
And how we do that. So my goal, whether it be a minor goal about getting out of bed and wiggling my toes, or a larger goal in building a successful business, okay, it all starts with what is the conversation of my mind, okay, and that is what drives me to my success.
You remind me of something my last guest on the show said. So he used to work for Tony Robbins. He was Tony Robbins' top sales guy and trainer for years. And he went out on his own. And for 20 some years, he's been a coach himself. And he said one of the first conversations he has with any prospective client, he's vetting them. They're not just hiring him. He's vetting them when they're having that first conversation. And he says a lot of times he has to tell people in that first conversation, they'll talk about what they want. I want to make more money. I want to lose weight. I wanted this. I wanted that. Right. And he'll interrupt them and say, I don't care about what you want. What I care about is what are you committed to? Right. A lot of us want a lot of things and we're not committed to doing whatever it takes to get those things. Right. I don't work with wants. Right. That's the way he phrases it.
Sure.
So I'm not sure what it was that you said. Something as you were talking that made me think about. So we've talked a lot about the dialogue inside of us. And when you're talking, for some reason, I was thinking about feedback to others outside of us, right? And I always think about the analogy of like a boxer. I don't know if you watch boxing or combat sports. I like to watch MMA, mixed martial arts. And one of the things that I see that's a great example of what not to do with feedback is a guy's in the ring and he's fighting another guy, and his cornerman, his coach in the corner will tell him what not to do, right? Like, don't throw your left hook. And
Right.
as soon as I hear that, I think, you know what that guy's probably thinking? Well, what the heck do you want? Don't tell me what not to do.
Not to do.
Right.
Yeah, tell me what to do.
Parents make this mistake a lot when they tell a child, don't do this, don't do that. And the child, sometimes they'll just freeze and they're thinking, what am I supposed to do instead of this? Right.
Right.
And so that to me all leads back to, how do we give good feedback? So in your experience, both as a trainer and in your military career and in lots of other areas, what are some things that you could share with us in terms of giving feedback in a way that is maybe more effective than some of the other ways that people could do it?
Well, when I look at feedback, the first thing I think is feedback is a gift. Okay, it's a gift to be received. It's a gift to be given. Whether we like it or not, whether we agree with it or not, whether we want it or not, is irrelevant. Okay, when I get feedback, if I don't like it, it's still a gift. Okay, something to learn from, something to grow from, something to benefit from in some way, shape, or form. Okay, whether it's be to change the way I'm doing something, or I'm not buying into what you're saying and not necessarily taking it. Okay, but it's still a gift. Okay, and so when I'm giving feedback, I think the most important aspect, and you and I have talked about this before in your model, and that is the key is to listen. Okay, the key to feedback is really listening, and most of us don't listen. We hear. Okay, we physiologically have the ear pieces that make us hear, bones and whatever, but we don't really truly listen.
And hearing a sound isn't the same as listening.
Right, exactly. And I think it's imperative that we, as a society, as individuals, as a nation, that we spend majority of our time truly listening. And the only way that becomes effective is if the messenger if the receiver understands the message as the sender intended for the message to be understood. Okay, it's a little bit of a tongue twister there, but I'll say it one more time. Effective communication, effective feedback is only good when the receiver understands the message that the sender intended for the receiver to understand. And so, to put it into a more simpler phrase as well, and that is, to really truly listen, I have to be able to validate the other person. Now, I say validate because I think that's the crux of it, but too many people confuse that if I validate somebody, then I'm agreeing with them, or I'm letting them think I agree with them. And that's not the case. That is not the case. Validating is just to make them feel worthy of your listening to them. Okay.
Yeah.
And you can't validate them unless you did listen and communicate to them in a way that they go back and go, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. If you don't get that, then you haven't fully heard the message as the sender intended for you to understand. And so you have to go back and listen some more and have that dialogue and have that conversation, so that when I do this, I usually have some catchphrases, and those catchphrases sound kind of hokey at first until they become part of your vocabulary and they part of who you are. So what I'm understanding you to say, John, is that you're really passionate about getting the word out to other people and communicating in a way so that they truly walk away from your podcast with valuable information that will help them tomorrow. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
That's right.
Yeah. If I'm saying instead, so what you really want is you just want people to do what you're telling them to do because you know what you have to say is the right answer. You're going to come back and say, no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying, and we're going to have that dialogue back and forth. And by listening to you, by actively listening, then I may be able to respond to your concern or respond to your issue, give you advice, give you a recommendation, provide you feedback. But it's like going into the doctor's office and the doctor looking at you, and she says to you, hmm, all right, let me write you out a subscription for or prescription for this, and I'll see you back at the hospital on this day, and we'll perform this procedure. Ludicrous. The doctor is going to examine you. They're going to ask you questions. They're going to see what information that they can get from you and your body to help you determine what do they need to do. And so providing feedback is kind of the same way. I've got to really listen to what is being shared in order to give value added feedback, recommendations, or advice.
Yeah, one of the things that I realized quite a while ago was the most common barrier that for me personally, and I think for a lot of other people too, listening effectively, listening actively, is constantly thinking about I'm not really listening. I'm just waiting my turn, right? I'm thinking about something else. Maybe what I'm going to say next, maybe your comment triggered something, and then I went off on a rabbit trail chasing that thought. And one of the things I found very helpful is these two things I have in my hands right here. If you're just listening and not watching, it's just a pen and some index cards. Always having something to write on and to write with me. So when I'm listening and I get distracted with some thought, I write it down so I can kind of flush it out of my mind so that I can then focus on what you're saying. So you may have noticed as you've been talking, every once in a while, I'll jot something down. And for me, that made me feel more comfortable that, oh, now I don't have to worry that I'm going to forget to ask that question, but then I can forget about it and stay focused.
Refocus. Sure.
Yeah. Because that challenge that we have with, and I think the numbers are something like the average person talks at like 150 words per minute. And I've heard different stats, everything from 450 to 600 words per minute, that we can actually process things. And that gap is what leads us to stray off, right? It doesn't take us that long to just hear it. And now we're going, well, then, our brain just kind of gets busy or wants to get busy with something else. Something that you said about very important distinction that you made, and Chris Voss talks about, he uses the term tactical empathy to distinguish between that and emotional empathy. Now, psychologists refer to it as cognitive empathy. The difference being, most people, when you say empathy, they think of emotional empathy, right? I want to feel what that other person is feeling. The distinction with cognitive is it's a different purpose. My purpose is to understand where you're coming from, not to get on the same page with you, right? And the distinction you made was really important. It doesn't mean agreement, right? For Chris Voss, for if you haven't heard of him, he was an FBI hostage negotiator for years and taught all the hostage negotiators in the FBI for years. So he makes that distinction that, hey, when I went to negotiate with the hostage taker, I didn't want to find common ground with that guy. right? I don't want to build rapport with him, trying to find out what his favorite color is or something else we have in common, because I probably don't want to have much in common with him. But what I do need to do is I need to get his trust by having that cognitive or tactical empathy so that I can say, okay, I've heard you say, so what I'm hearing is, and you feed it back to them, just like you said, in a way that they go, that's right. And now that person feels like you get me. I don't care if you like me. I don't care if I like you. You understand where I'm coming from. So if we're going to negotiate, work together, whatever the relationship is, you get where I'm coming from. I can work with this guy. So very important distinction, because sometimes you may not want to have that emotional empathy. I mean, if you're talking to your spouse, you can have both types of empathy. But in some situations, you might want to keep things at an arm's length emotionally, but you still need to have those listening skills. Chris Voss even talks about something he calls labeling. He gets very technical when he talks about listening, because the stakes there were life and death, right? When he was listening. And he talks about labeling and using beginning sentences with terms like sounds like, looks like, feels like. It sounds like you feel frustrated.
Yeah.
It feels to me like you feel misunderstood, right? And part of what that language is doing is it's basically putting it back on me saying, I think this is how you feel, but I'm
Right.
not sure. It sounds like that. So it
Right.
kind of opens the door for the other person to say, not quite, and correct you, right? And then it may be
Exactly.
iterative. You may have to go back and forth more than once,
Mm-hmm.
but you got to get to that end point where they go, that's it. You got it. You
And what people need to
understood.
walk away from this conversation with is just what you said and what I said is your hostage negotiator has some key phrases.
Yeah.
It sounds like, it feels like, it looks like these are things that sound initially somewhat hokey to persons who's not used to doing it. But the more you
Yeah.
do it, the more you make it a part of your conversation and your vocabulary, the
Yeah.
more normal, the more comfortable it becomes. And it becomes a part of who we are. And so certainly in hostage negotiation, that certainly makes sense too, where you don't necessarily are looking for common ground. Um, but it's interesting you bring all this up because I used to belong to an organization called Braver Angels. Some of your audience members may have heard of them. It's a nationwide organization. It's been around since the beginning of the 2016 election, okay, and Trump becoming president. And although our nation has slowly but surely been divided over the course of decades, not in the last, 8 years or 6 years, but it's been going on for a long time. But the vitriol and the hostilities that was going on between neighbors and family members and friends was getting out of control. And this organization was created as a result of that. And the purpose of the mission of this organization, Braver Angels, is to bring individuals that are on the left, individuals that are on the right, that have opposing views and ideas. And oh, by the way, bring it to the table and have a conversation, one that
Yeah.
is with respect and a desire to listen to each other. And that's a big premise of what we do with the Braver Angels, John, is the goal is not to sway anybody's values or opinions. I meet with somebody from a liberal perspective or a liberal view. My purpose is not to convince them my way of thinking, and they're not going to change my way of thinking. But what works
Yeah.
for us and what helps us is to bring these conversations together, and then we find out that there is common ground, and there's not a lot of difference in many cases. Yes, how we're going to get there might be different, okay, but we still have the same goal. And in fact, I attended one of our sessions where it was a town hall meeting, and the public was invited to our session, and it was a parliamentarian debate. What I mean by parliamentarian debate, it was very structured. It was slowed down so that it didn't get too much energy to facilitate, bad behavior. And we had some rules and everything else, just like they do in a parliamentarian type of an event. You can't talk to the person, you talk to a chairperson, right? But the goal here is to just express how I feel, not you. You don't sit there and say, well, you did this and you guys think this, you guys are blah, blah, blah. This is how I feel. Okay. This is what I think. This is what I'm doing. Okay. And why. And the conversation that we had on this particular event was prior to this whole Roe versus Wade issue, but it was about abortion, which has been around as long as life, obviously, or not life, depending on your perspective. Okay, but it was about pro-choice and pro-life. Okay, and people from the audience, people from the community came in with their agenda. Okay, and the members of the organization came in with our agenda. I came in with a conservative agenda. Others came in from a liberal agenda or a pro-life or pro-choice agenda. And everybody shared their views and their perspectives without the intent of calling out names or insulting or shaming or anything like that. And we used our words carefully, and we chose them not to tiptoe around or anything like that. It wasn't that at all. But really what came out of this was after the event, a group of us were having some drinks together. Imagine that, and just socializing. And one of the young ladies who was pro-choice, okay, said, one of the things I'm taking away from this event today, there's not a single one of us here who came here to talk about killing babies. And I thought, man, how profound, because that is the common ground. Now we have different views and opinions on it, but even the left, okay, or the pro-choice, their mission is not to kill babies. But we need to come to a way of coming to a solution. And from what I understand in Colorado, as a result of that conversation, is they worked together, pro-life and pro-choice worked together to come up with a solution and a process. And I don't know the details of it, but what they came up with resulted in a decline, a significant decline on unwanted pregnancies. And at the end of the day, that was success for everybody. So it really is listening, like you said, John.
Yeah, I think the phrase that sums all this up best, that the one that I've heard at least for me, is the ability to disagree without becoming disagreeable.
Yeah.
And I feel like when I grew up, that used to be something that the people that I spent time around, that was just kind of a norm for us. And then as I started to meet other people, I started to see, some people who just, they were very ideological, and they were black and white, and us and them, and teams, and us versus the other team, and all that. And the term that I heard that describes the approach, I think, is dialectic, right? Approaching, and it's all kind of how you frame it, right? It's approaching a conversation not for the purpose of proving you wrong and proving myself right. It's approaching this conversation for the purpose of understanding your point of view and learning. Yes. Because if I think whatever the topic is, that I'm convinced before we go in that I'm right about this, and I don't want to be confused by the facts, right? I don't want to hear anything that's counter to my position because I'm so certain in my position. Well, when it comes to religion, I guess that's kind of by default how most people are, but very few things are like religion, where that's just your sort of line in the sand that you believe, and you're not really open to someone changing those beliefs. And I think it's Ray Dalio that talks about this, the concept of radical candor, and he actively promotes. He actually has videos that he's put out. I don't know if they're on YouTube or in his app, of meetings, internal meetings from his company, where he encourages people to disagree with him, right? He's this multi-billionaire, runs a giant hedge fund, and he still says, hey, I expect you guys in this meeting to disagree with me. If everybody's just saying yes and agree with me, some of us aren't really necessary here. right?
Yep.
I want to hear opposing points of view and other ideas, and everything's not always linear, that we go from A to B. Maybe we need to go around or under or over, but sometimes we don't get there the best way just by holding our ground that this is a black and white thing and I'm right and you're wrong. Framing is a big part of that, right? First, framing in our own mind. Okay, this is my purpose in this conversation, in this communication. I want to learn. I want to understand Anthony's point of view on this. I'm just setting my own view to the side. I just want to understand. And then that listening that you talked about. So
and it's a powerful experience to be able to do that, to be able to be open-minded enough to allow yourself to hear and to listen to what's being said, without necessarily having to change your values, but to learn and to grow and to better understand why they feel this way, why they being whoever you're talking with, have a different view. And who knows, there's been occasions where I've listened and I've changed a view of mine because of that conversation.
What you said earlier when I asked you the question about goal setting is a great example. I was looking at it like two opposing views on how to approach goal setting. And you kind of reframed that and said, well, I don't think those things are in conflict with each other. And after listening to you, I went, why am I trying to reconcile this? There's nothing to reconcile here. Right. So it's just yet another example. Sometimes you're just looking at it in a way that's maybe not as helpful to yourself as maybe a different perspective on it or different frame on it.
And it brings us full circle. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but it brings us full circle to that, to the very beginning of this conversation about, success. It's everything you think it is. And so the success in having a debate, having a conversation, is being open-minded, being, having the thought process that, hey, I can listen to understand. I can listen without having to fight or to have a in virtual type of response.
Yep. So I'm looking at the clock here and I see we're at the top of the hour. So I want to respect your time. I have a couple of quick questions I'd like to ask you if you've got a couple minutes.
I'm having a great time. So we're
perfect.
Good.
Okay. So one of the things that I want to shift gears a little bit because I want to get your perspective on something that I think would be really valuable for the audience and an area that I think you have a lot of experience to offer. So ever since the pandemic hit and a lot of people got sent home and were working virtually, now we've got a lot of organizations that are either working virtually only or they're doing some kind of a hybrid, some combination where people are spending some time in the office, some time at home, or some people are in the office, some people are at home. And I get a lot of questions in the training that I do around communication about what can we do better when we are communicating virtually, whether that's in meetings, trainings, whatever the case may be, but especially in meetings. Do you have any tips that you could offer for people that are out there that are working in these virtual environments for when they're in meetings, whether they're running them or they're just attending them, on things they can do to be more effective when they're virtual?
Sure. So most of the training events that we do are virtual now. And so I might have an audience of, and we keep our audiences to about 30 or below for a specific reason. Now we do go higher, but those become more like webinars, which is fine. But when we're looking at interactive engagement training, we're trying to keep the group dynamics to 30 or below. Okay, 30 participants or below. And the first thing I say right up front, create expectations. You got to create expectations right up front. No different than brick and mortar environment or a virtual environment. And my expectation when I send out reminder emails or when I'm talking to a client, I'm letting them know that the expectation, this is a camera on event. Period. Dot. It's a camera on event. Now I can't reach through the lens here and turn on everybody's camera, but I can set the stage for that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I do that right up front. And then I reiterate that in my communications at the beginning of the seminar, beginning of the meeting, is this is a camera on event. Please come prepared. Please dress appropriately. Please create an environment that is conducive to an online meeting. Okay. And I'm not going to force anybody to do something that they don't want to. I just create a safe environment. And that's, I think, really a big important aspect there. Again, no different than the brick and mortar than it is the virtual, is you have to create a psychologically, emotionally safe environment for your staff and your employees. And if you start bullying them, it's not going to work. Okay. And eventually, most people, if not all people, will get on board. Okay. But when you start dictating to them in this type of environment, I think we're going to lose. The other thing that I think is important is I'm all about engagement. So if I've got a staff meeting of 15 people, okay, and I'm running that meeting, I'm going to run that meeting very similar to a brick and mortar meeting. And so I'm going to have roles. I'm going to have a meeting leader. I'm going to have a meeting facilitator. I'm going to have a meeting note taker, okay, and or timekeeper. Okay. Now I want to make a distinction between the meeting leader and the meeting facilitator. If I've got a group of 5 people, 8 people, 10 people, however large my meeting is, most organizations, the meeting leader pretends to be the meeting facilitator. Okay. This does not work because the meeting leader is oftentimes the crux of the problem. Okay. and are unable to facilitate the issues as themselves. Okay. And what I mean by facilitate, I don't mean to facilitate the agenda. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about facilitating. Hey, John, that sounds really important. However, can you and Anthony take that offline? It sounds like something that's not necessary here at this meeting. The facilitator can keep things on track. Okay.
Gotcha.
That's what I'm talking about. If it's going too long, or if it's sidebar conversations, or whatever the case may be. But if this is your meeting, John, if this is your meeting, and I'm the facilitator and I make the recommendation, is this something that we can table for tomorrow, or this something you can take offline with Anthony separately? That's my job, okay, as a facilitator. Your job is to say, Anthony, you're absolutely right. Sorry about that. Let's get it back on track, ladies and gentlemen. Tony, why don't you and I talk about this after the meeting this afternoon? Okay, great. Or you can say, Anthony, appreciate that. That's important. However, before we can move on, I got to get this resolved with Tony and I. So, guys, take a break for a few minutes. Just hang out right here. Don't go anywhere. Sit in and listen in. But Tony, you and I, let's wrap this up real quick in 2 minutes or less. Okay. Then you're the leader. You know, I'm not the leader. So that's the other thing that I do, and I train my audiences to do in this hybrid environment. Have structure, set expectations, and provide roles for the audience. Okay. I think those are probably the two critical parts where we're talking about very specific meetings. Beyond that, I would submit that it's about creating an environment that leads up to those things. So in other words, you know, when you have meetings, listen, we got to be creative in what we do. You know, I tell people, if you're using Teams or using Zoom or whatever platform you're using, have a little fun. You know, you have fun in the office, you laugh, you joke, nothing's all serious about everything all the time. And so I have some clients, you know, they'll have a Zoom theme, virtual theme going on. And so for a weekly meeting, they have a virtual theme. And, you know, today's sports day. And so everybody bring up your favorite college football team, or there you go. Exactly. As a virtual theme, as your virtual background, bring up your favorite Disney character. You know, what is your favorite movie? What is your, whatever it is, have a theme. Everybody bring one up, have a little bit of fun with it, and get creative in how you do things.
I like that. The reason I have this football here actually has nothing to do with the theme as much as I mentioned coach earlier, Coach John Wooden. But I remember a football coach, Coach Vince Lombardi, people always used to say he would start out the preseason every year. And these were guys, some of them have been in, you know, world championship games, you know, top of the food chain players. And he would hold up a football and say, gentlemen, this is a football, right? He would go right all the way back to the most basic fundamental things every time. And you said something that I'd love for you to expand on a little bit. You said it's important that you create a safe environment. Sure. What are some specific things that we can do to create that feeling of a safe environment for the participants?
Well, I think in again, any format, whether it be brick and mortar or virtual, is we talked about how important it is to listen. If you're not listening, that's ground zero. You know, being respectful. When I talk to audience, and I'll ask you, are there people in your life, that, quite frankly, you have no respect for? Sure, we all do. Okay, we all have people we don't respect. However, my guess is your audience, me, I can always be respectful. And that's the big difference. I may not respect this person, but I'll always be respectful. And so we have to be respectful of our team members, our staff members, and things like that. Be willing to listen to what they have to say. I was just talking to a client yesterday, and she was sharing with me how her immediate director was being dictatorial about this work from home thing, okay, or return to work, okay, and saying, on this day at this time, you all will be reporting back to work. And I think I heard this about either Facebook or Amazon, actually, or Microsoft, one of the big techs, okay, where the CEO says on 1 October, it is a 100% in office environment. If you're not here on 1 October, don't come back on 2 October because you don't have a job. Okay. That's fine if you have the power to do that. But if the environment is such that there's flexibility to that, and you don't have a good reason for coming back into the office, then you're going to have some difficulty with that. And so what I've shared with audiences and my coaching of senior leaders is that if you're going to create a mandatory work in the office type environment, it better be a good reason that it's something that they can't do at home. Because if they're already doing it at home and you're making them drive 15, 30, 45 minutes an hour to come in and work at a cubicle and do the exact same thing, then you're going to have distrust, you're going to have resentment, you're going to have a lot of distractions to the mission if you don't have a reason. And so I started coaching some of my clients in, okay, if you're going to have this flex schedule where you can bring people in, certain days a week. I got one client that we set it up to where everybody did come in on the same day. And the same day is when they all did something different than they could do at home. And that is they met as a group, they brainstormed issues, they had lunch together, they had a social environment. They had a very different environment for that one day a week than they did, other ways. But when you have people that are coming in just simply to do what they're doing at home, I think you're going to have some failure there. The world has changed. I mean, I'm not sure which way we're going to go, but I don't think we'll ever go back to a 100% work from the office type of environment. It's got to be mission essential type of a deal, in my opinion.
Yeah, all the polls that I've looked at point in that direction. But there's people who get tired of hearing the new normal, but I agree. I don't, all the data tells us it's never going to be the same as it was before. You said something that reminded me of a phrase I heard not too long ago, which I have adopted. It's catchy, but I think there's meat on the bone to it, and it's no agenda, no attenda. Right?
Yeah.
Stop going to meetings where there's no agenda. Right? Mm-hmm. Stop calling people into the office, or even a virtual meeting for that matter.
Sure.
If everybody doesn't know what we're there for, and I'm kind of a stickler, if we don't all have to be there, then we shouldn't be having a meeting with all those people attending in the first place, because there's lots of other ways that we can get that done, whether it's email or a phone call or whatever. Mm-hmm. But to block off, let's say, an hour, just as an example, that everyone has to be the same place, even if it's on Zoom, at the same time, we need to be respectful of people's time and not just call a meeting just because we have people to report to us, and we can, right? So there's a lot more philosophically that I took away from that little catchphrase, the no agenda, no attenda.
Right.
Much more about, be purposeful about meetings and everything else.
When you talk about data too, supervisors are going to have to learn how to lead. Leaders are going to have to know getting be leaders. And that means that they have to be able to measure employee performance. If they can't measure employee performance 3 years ago, and they don't have to do it now, or they're not doing it now, it's going to be even worse, because we can't measure performance by a red and green blinking light on our computer, or a key or mouse pad moving around. We can't. That's not performance. That's either circumventing the system by figuring out how to make your green light come on, or how to make your mouse move when you're not there and you're out at the beach. That's not the way to measure performance. And so supervisors, managers, and leaders are going to have to be more efficient and more effective in measuring performance. Until they do that, they're not going to have a good hybrid or work from home environment until they do. Because your bad employee, they're going to be bad employee whether in the office or at home. And if they're bad employee back home, then why are you keeping them in the first place? Kick them off the porch.
So you just hit on something that I'd like to get your take on, which is you've used the word supervisor, manager, and leader, right? to me, those are all very distinct things. How would you, just for simplicity, how would you distinguish between, in a work environment, a leader versus a manager?
So the leader has an overarching view of an entire organization, whether that organization be a staff of 10, or they're providing guidance and direction to people. Okay, they're leading people, they're getting other people to do what they want to get done. Okay, in my mind, the manager doesn't necessarily have people. They manage a program, and so they may have resources, human resources, but they don't provide the leadership or guidance and the vision and the mission and all that kind of stuff. They provide tasks. Okay, so the
it sounds
leader
like,
is someone. Go ahead.
well, it sounds like, to your definition, that's more of a logistical kind of facilitating the logistics getting done, more so than
Right.
setting a vision and those
Correct.
bigger things. Okay,
Correct. Exactly.
great. Okay. So I want to ask you a couple of sort of wrap up questions here, because I want to make sure that we're respecting your time. So one of them is, I like to ask all of my guests for a question for the next guest. So if you were running a podcast,
Right.
what would be a question that you would like to ask a guest? It could be about anything. No restraints.
So my vision, my purpose in life, as I've mentioned several times, is, how do I have a positive influence on the people that I meet? And so I guess in that altruistic type of fashion, that would be the question: is what have you done today? What have you done this week? What have you done this month to have a positive influence? Well, what do you do to have a positive influence on others? Because if we as a society are going to continue to prosper, whether the society being a global society or a national society or a institution of the family, okay, a husband and wife, or 2 kids and a dog and a spouse, what have you done to have a positive influence on somebody
I like that question.
today, recently?
So last question, and I'll give full credit. I stole this from Tim Ferriss because I just love the question.
Sure.
If I gave you a free billboard and you can put anything you want on it, it's not, you can't put an advertisement for your business, but you can put anything else you want on the billboard, what would you put on the billboard?
I feel bad now because I feel like I'm falling on one simple thing, but I can't help but to say
That's okay.
the exact same thing.
Okay.
I mean, the world has to come together. Even if we have different views or perspectives or feelings about things, we still need to come together as a society, as humanity. And how are you having a positive influence on somebody? Maybe it's a child, maybe it's a homeless person, maybe it's a spouse, a coworker, somebody. How did you make somebody else's day? So that would be my billboard. What have you done to influence somebody positively today?
To me, giving those same answers just speaks to your focus.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
That's what that says to me. Well, Anthony, I could sit here and talk to you all day, but again, I want to respect your time, and we got to go ahead and wrap up. I would love to have you back on down the road, do a part 2 to this, because there's so much wisdom and experience that you have to share with our audience. And I love picking your brain, even when it's offline. So with that, I want to go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank you for your time today, and we'll see you guys next time.